I turned 67 inches November, and the only candle on my birthday cake was the one I lit myself. It wasn't always like this. There was a time when this house on Clover Ridge Road smelled like pot roast on Sundays, and the sound of children arguing over the television remote was the most annoying and most wonderful thing in the world. That was before my husband passed, before my older daughter moved to Portland and stopped returning calls, before my younger son became someone I barely recognized. I woke up that birthday morning the same way I woke up most mornings, too early, too quiet, with the particular kind of ache that has nothing to do with my joints. I made coffee in the kitchen where the wallpaper was still the same yellow sunflower pattern I'd chosen with my husband 28 years ago. Some people would say it was time to redecorate. I said it was time to remember that we picked it out together on a Tuesday afternoon, when we had absolutely nothing to do and everything to look forward to. My husband had died 4 years earlier. Pancreatic cancer. 6 weeks from diagnosis to the end. The speed of it still made me feel like the floor had dropped out from under my life without warning. He was a high school history teacher, patient, funny, the kind of man who remembered every student's name 20 years after graduation. He left behind a paid-off house, a modest life insurance policy, some savings, and 3 people who were supposed to be a family. My older daughter lived across the country and worked as a physician assistant. We had a falling out 2 years after her father died. The kind that starts over something small and grows into a wall neither person knows how to climb. She had opinions about how I was handling the grief. I had opinions about her handling them for me. We said things. The calls got shorter, then stopped. My younger son was 34. He had his father's chin and his father's smile, and very little else of his father's character. That sounds unkind. I spent years telling myself it wasn't true, but sitting alone at my kitchen table on my birthday, I had run out of the energy required to believe comfortable untruths. He had always been the one I worried about most, not because he was troubled, exactly, but because he lived his life like a man who believed the ground would always catch him. He switched careers the way other people switched television channels, graphic design, then marketing, then something involving cryptocurrency that he explained to me 3 times, and I still couldn't quite follow. He borrowed money and paid it back irregularly, if at all. I kept a small notebook in the drawer of my nightstand where I wrote down the amounts and dates, not to hold it over him, but because I am my mother's daughter, and my mother always said that if you love someone, you keep honest records. He called that birthday morning, which surprised me. "Mom," he said. And his voice had that particular brightness that I'd learned over the years meant he wanted something. "Happy birthday. How are you feeling?" "Old," I said, "but functional." He laughed, and for a moment it was easy to forget the wall that had been building between us. He told me he had news, important news. He asked if he could come by that weekend and bring someone special. I already knew there was a woman. He'd mentioned her in passing over the past few months, always in the way people mention things they're not ready to fully commit to. In conversation, her name dropped casually, details vague. Her name was Renata. She worked in real estate development. He said she was extraordinary. I made pot roast that Saturday. I set the table with the good dishes. They arrived at noon. My son looked polished in a way that told me the clothes were new. Renata was tall, with dark hair, and the kind of posture that suggests a person has spent a great deal of time thinking about how they appear to others. She shook my hand firmly and looked around the living room with eyes that cataloged everything without appearing to. "This is a beautiful property," she said. "Great bones." I thanked her and offered coffee. Over lunch, she was charming in the practiced way of people who work in sales. She asked me questions and listened to the answers with visible attention, which is rarer than it should be. My son watched her the way he used to watch his father coach his little league team, with an admiration that was almost touching, slightly anxious. They stayed through the afternoon. My son helped me with dishes while Renata walked through the back garden, phone to her ear. I watched her through the kitchen window. "She's wonderful, isn't she?" my son said. It wasn't quite a question. "She seems very confident," I said carefully. He turned to look at me. "I'm going to ask her to marry me, Mom. I wanted you to know first." I dried a plate and thought about what to say. Are you sure? You've known her 6 months. When it's right, it's right. He smiled that smile of his. Dad knew in 3 weeks. That was true. And also not quite the same thing, though I couldn't articulate why in the moment. I told him I was happy for him and meant part of it. They came back a month later. By then the ring was on her finger, and Renata sat at my kitchen table with the ease of someone who has already decided a place belongs to them. We talked about the wedding. I asked about their plans. My son looked at Renata, and she set down her coffee cup and folded her hands. We've been thinking about the future, she said. Our financial future, specifically. My son and I want to build something real. And we have an opportunity to do that. There's a development project my firm is involved in that could generate significant returns, but the entry investment is substantial. I waited. We were hoping, my son said, that you might consider being part of it. What kind of investment? I asked. Renata explained it smoothly. Her firm was developing a mixed-use property in a growing part of the city. The return projections were impressive. The timeline was 2 years. They needed around $200,000. I set down my own cup. That's most of my savings. It would be a loan, my son said quickly. We'd pay you back with interest. And there's one other thing, Renata said, and her voice shifted slightly, became more precise. We'd also like to use this house as collateral. Just as a formality, to secure financing on our end. The room was very quiet for a moment. You want me to put my house up as collateral for an investment I don't control? I said. It's standard practice, Renata said. In development financing, I know what collateral means. I looked at my son. Is this why you brought me into this conversation? As an investor? Or as a source of funding? He had the grace to look uncomfortable. Mom, this is a real opportunity. This isn't like my other projects. Renata knows what she's doing. This is her industry. I'm sure she does, I said. But this house is the only thing I have that's fully mine. Your father and I paid for it together. It's where I live. It's my security if I get sick, or if something happens. Renata leaned forward slightly. With respect, Margaret, the money is sitting in a savings account earning almost nothing. This would put it to work. It's working just fine as a safety net, I said. My son sat back and I saw something harden in his expression, something I recognized from when he was 15, and I wouldn't let him drop out of summer school. We thought you'd want to help us get started. This is our future, Mom. Our life together. I do want to help you. I would be glad to help with a wedding, within reason. But I'm not signing over my house. They left shortly after. The pot roast sat mostly uneaten. The calls that followed over the next 2 weeks were uncomfortable. My son called every few days with new angles, different numbers, revised timelines, testimonials from people in Renata's firm who'd seen the returns. I listened each time and said the same thing. I didn't have $200,000 to risk, and I would not be using my home as collateral. Then the calls stopped. 3 weeks later, a different kind of call came. It was my son, and his voice had lost the salesmanship. It was flat and formal, the way his voice got when he'd made a decision he knew was wrong but had committed to anyway. Mom, Renata and I have been talking to a lawyer. I sat down. We think you haven't been thinking clearly. Since Dad died, you've been isolated. You've made some decisions that we're concerned about. We think it might be worth having a doctor evaluate your cognitive health. I was so stunned I said nothing for almost 10 seconds. You want to have me declared incompetent, I finally said. Because I won't give you my house. That's not what this is. That is exactly what this is. My voice was steady in a way I was grateful for. You want a doctor to say I can't manage my own affairs, so that someone else can manage them for you. Renata thinks. I don't care what Renata thinks. I took a breath. Don't call me again until you're ready to have a real conversation. I hung up the phone and sat at the kitchen table for a long time. Outside, the November wind was stripping the last leaves from the oak tree my husband had planted the year my older daughter was born. I watched them go. Then I went to my nightstand, opened the drawer, and looked at my notebook. Then I looked at the phone for a long time. My older daughter and I had not spoken properly in almost 2 years. The last real conversation had ended badly. She thought I was letting my younger son take advantage of my grief. I thought she was criticizing me from a comfortable distance of 3,000 miles. We were both partly right, which made it worse. I dialed her number. She answered on the second ring. Mom? She sounded immediately alert, the way medical people do. It's late. Are you okay? No, I said honestly. I'm not. I told her everything. She didn't interrupt. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, He's trying to get you declared incompetent so they can access your assets. This is elder financial abuse, Mom. This is actually what it's called. I know what it is. Have they filed anything? Not yet. I don't know. Okay. I could hear her moving around, a door closing. I'm coming. Don't sign anything. Don't let anyone into the house you don't know. And if you get any legal paperwork, don't throw it away. You don't have to. Mom. Her voice was firm in the way I remembered from when she was 12 and had made up her mind about something. I'm coming. She arrived 4 days later, and she looked older than I remembered, and also more like herself. We stood in the doorway for a moment, and then we hugged, and neither of us said anything about the 2 years. She'd spoken to a colleague who recommended an elder law attorney named Patricia Osei, a sharp woman in her 50s, who met with us in her office the following morning and listened to everything without expression. Then she opened a legal pad and began writing. The grounds for a competency petition require medical evidence of cognitive impairment, she said. Do you have any diagnosed conditions? High blood pressure, arthritis. I take medication for both. Have any doctor suggested any cognitive concerns? No. My last physical was 8 months ago and everything was normal. Good. We'll get a recent cognitive evaluation done proactively and put it on record. That preempts their ability to select their own evaluator. She looked at me steadily. And if they file? We respond. If they've been pressuring you financially, that itself is actionable. 2 weeks later, the paperwork arrived. My son and Renata had filed a petition in probate court, alleging that I showed signs of diminished capacity and was unable to manage my own financial affairs responsibly. They had a declaration from a doctor I had seen exactly once, 3 years ago, for a sinus infection, who stated that, in his assessment, I had seemed confused and forgetful. They had a statement from Renata herself describing a conversation where I had allegedly forgotten the details of a loan I'd given my son, which was proof, she claimed, of memory impairment. I read the statement and felt something shift inside me past anger, past hurt, into something cooler and more determined. My attorney filed our response. We submitted the results of my cognitive evaluation, administered by a neuropsychologist, showing no evidence of impairment whatsoever. We submitted records from my primary care physician, who had treated me for 15 years, and was willing to testify that I was, in her professional opinion, completely competent. We submitted the notebook. My older daughter sat at the kitchen table the night before the hearing, going through the notebook page by page. She was quiet for a long time. Mom, she finally said, he borrowed from you 41 times in 6 years. I know. $87,000. I know. She closed the notebook and looked at me. Why didn't you tell me? I thought about it. Because telling you would have meant saying out loud that I knew he was using me. And I wasn't ready to know that. She reached across the table and took my hand, and we sat like that for a while in the sunflower kitchen. The courthouse in Millfield was smaller than I expected. Pale brick, wide steps, a lobby that smelled like old paper and floor wax. My older daughter walked beside me. My attorney was already there, organizing folders with colored tabs. My son and Renata arrived together. He was wearing a new suit. She was wearing the expression of someone who had rehearsed confidence so many times, it had become a different thing entirely from the real kind. Their attorney was a man who smiled in the direction of the judge frequently and unnecessarily. The judge was a woman named the Honorable Carol Dempsey, with reading glasses she wore on a chain and a manner that suggested she had heard every variety of human foolishness and had patience for none of it. My son's attorney made his opening. The petitioners, he said, were acting out of genuine concern for the welfare of an elderly woman who had been showing troubling signs of confusion and poor judgment. The evidence would demonstrate that Margaret I noticed he used my first name was increasingly unable to manage complex financial decisions, and that her refusal to engage with reasonable family concerns was itself evidence of impaired judgment. My attorney stood and said, simply, that the evidence would show a woman of entirely sound mind, whose sound mind had led her to decline an arrangement that would have required her to put her home at risk, and that the petition before the court was less about protecting a mother and considerably more about accessing her assets. The doctor who'd treated me for the sinus infection was called first. Under cross-examination, my attorney established that he had seen me once, for approximately 12 minutes, and had no training whatsoever in cognitive assessment. On what basis? My attorney asked. Do you characterize someone as confused? She seemed uncertain about some details. You had treated her once before, correct? Yes. So you had no baseline to compare to? A pause. No. And yet you signed a declaration about her cognitive status. He looked toward the petitioner's table. I was asked to provide my professional opinion. By whom? Another pause. By Miss Renata. My attorney moved on. Renata took the stand. She was composed and articulate, and said all the right things in the right tone, concerned future daughter-in-law, worried about the family's matriarch, wanting only the best outcome for everyone. She described the investment opportunity with the fluency of someone who had made the pitch many times. She spoke about the house as though it were a resource waiting to be properly utilized. My attorney asked her, pleasantly, about her firm. Renata confirmed the name, the location, the project in question. My attorney produced documentation she had obtained from the county recorder's office. The development project Renata had described had no filed permits. The address existed, but the parcel was owned by a holding company registered 4 months earlier. Its sole officer, a man who shared Renata's last name. Is this your brother? My attorney asked. Renata's composure developed a hairline crack. We occasionally worked together. Were you planning to disclose this relationship to the investors you were soliciting? That's not. Were you planning to disclose to Margaret, specifically, that the entity holding the collateralized funds would be controlled by a family member of yours? Their attorney objected. The judge sustained part of it, but the room had already heard the question. My attorney then asked about the statement in the petition claiming I had forgotten the details of a loan to my son. You stated that Margaret was unable to recall the specifics of a loan she had made, my attorney said. What were those specifics, in your recollection? Renata answered. My attorney placed the notebook on the table. I'd like to enter into the record this notebook maintained by Margaret, which documents 41 financial transactions with her son over 6 years, totaling $87,000, with dates, amounts, and stated purposes noted for each. Does this appear to be the document of someone who cannot recall her financial transactions? The room shifted. My son sat very still. When I was called, I walked to the stand slowly, because my knees required it, and sat with my hands folded on my lap. My attorney asked me to describe my daily life, my routines, my management of my finances. I answered clearly and in detail. She asked me about the investment proposal. I described it accurately, including the terms, the amount, the collateral requirements, and the date of the conversation. She asked me why I had declined. Because it would have meant risking the only home I have, I said. Because the investment structure was unusual, and I wasn't able to verify the project, and because I have medical expenses ahead of me that require me to have savings available. Saying no to something that wasn't in my interest doesn't mean I've lost the ability to think. It means I used it. The judge looked at me over her reading glasses for a moment. My primary care physician testified that I had been her patient for 15 years, and that she had observed no cognitive decline of any kind. She described my medical history straightforwardly, including the costs of the treatment I would likely need in the coming years. Without financial reserves, she said, her access to adequate care would be significantly compromised. My older daughter was the final witness. She was direct and precise in the way she'd always been, even as a child. She described the pattern of financial requests over the years, the amounts documented in the notebook, the instances she was aware of where I had provided assistance my son had not acknowledged or repaid. She described arriving after my call and what she had found a woman frightened, yes, but clear-headed, rational, and fully capable of explaining her own situation. Their attorney asked her, during cross-examination, whether it was possible her own estrangement from the family had left her without full context. She considered the question seriously. "It's possible," she said. "I've been absent in ways I regret. But I was absent, not her. My mother's record-keeping, her memory, her account of events, these all check out completely. You're asking whether my limited presence invalidates her competence. I'd ask whether it says more about what she was dealing with while I wasn't there." Judge Dempsey called a recess, returned, and ruled from the bench. "The petition is denied in its entirety," she said, her voice flat and clear. "The evidence presented does not come close to meeting the legal standard for incapacity. What it does demonstrate, to this court's significant concern, is an attempt to use the judicial system to pressure a competent adult into a financial arrangement she had clearly and repeatedly declined. That is not a use of this court I intend to facilitate." She looked at my son. "I would strongly encourage the petitioners to reflect carefully on what has been asked of this court today, and at whose expense." The gavel came down. Outside, in the pale winter light, my older daughter put her arm through mine, and we walked to the car without speaking. Behind us, I heard my son's voice, and then Renata's, clipped and low, and then the sound of separate footsteps going in different directions. I didn't look back. That evening, the three of us, my older daughter, my attorney, and I, sat in my kitchen and ate the lasagna my daughter had made the night before. And we talked about ordinary things. My attorney's daughter was applying to colleges. My older daughter's commute in Portland was getting worse. The oak tree in the yard had lost almost all its leaves. I noticed, around 9 o'clock, that I felt lighter than I had in years. Not happy, exactly. Not yet. But something had been set down that I hadn't realized I'd been carrying. My son called 10 days later. He called early in the morning, which told me he hadn't slept well. His voice had none of its usual performance to it. No brightness, no salesmanship, no careful angles. "I don't know what to say, Mom," he started. "That's all right," I said. "You don't have to say it all at once." He was quiet for a moment. Then, Renata left. I wasn't entirely surprised. "I'm sorry," I said, and meant part of it. She said the investment timing had changed. A short, humorless sound that wasn't quite a laugh. I think I believed what I wanted to believe about her. "People do that," I said carefully. "I did a terrible thing to you." His voice was rough. "I don't know how to explain it except that I let myself get convinced that you just didn't understand what was good for all of us. And I know he stopped. "That's not an explanation. That's an excuse." "Yes," I said. "It is." Another silence. "Is there any chance?" "Not yet," I said. "But there's not never. There's just not yet. Do you understand the difference?" He said he did. I wasn't sure he did, but it was a beginning. My older daughter stayed for 3 weeks. We cooked together and argued about nothing serious, and watched old movies on the couch, and talked about her father in the way I hadn't been able to do with anyone since the funeral. One morning she found me sitting at the kitchen table with the notebook open, not reading it, just sitting with it. "You should throw that away," she said. "Eventually." "Eventually," I agreed. "Not today." She sat across from me. "What do you want?" "Not for us. For you." I thought about it honestly. I want to learn how to have people over again. I haven't done that since your father died. I used to be good at it. I looked around the kitchen, and I want new wallpaper. I've been keeping this because it felt like letting go of him. But I think I can let it change and still keep him. She smiled. "Okay. We can start on the wallpaper this weekend." "I also want to go somewhere," I said. "I've always wanted to see New Mexico. The landscape. I saw pictures once, and I never forgot them." "Then go," she said simply. "Maybe you could come." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "Yeah, maybe I could." I booked the trip in January. My older daughter came with me, and we drove through the desert on a bright, cold morning with the radio on and the windows cracked, And the landscape was exactly what I had imagined from the pictures, enormous and ancient and utterly indifferent to any individual human trouble, which turned out to be exactly what I needed. My son and I began a tentative correspondence. Short calls at first, stilted, careful. He had taken a job at a small firm, something stable, and he mentioned it without asking me for anything, which was its own kind of progress. I didn't bring up the notebook. Neither did he. There were things we were both going to have to live with for a while before we could talk about them plainly. By spring, my older daughter visited every other month. My house had a new wallpaper in the kitchen, pale blue, with small white birds, and I had 2 friends from my book club who came over on Thursday evenings, and a garden that was beginning to do interesting things with the late April light. One Thursday evening, after my friends had gone and the kitchen was quiet, I stood at the back door and looked out at the yard. The oak tree my husband had planted was putting out new leaves, pale and tender and absolutely certain of themselves. I thought about what the judge had said, in that flat, clear voice, that I had demonstrated competence, that I had managed, clearly and repeatedly, to say no to something that wasn't in my interest. I had never thought of that as a skill before. I had spent most of my life thinking that love meant saying yes, that a good mother found a way, that keeping the peace was the same as keeping the family. Standing in the doorway of my own house, with the mortgage long paid, and the savings intact, and my name on every account and every deed, I understood something I wished I had understood sooner. The peace I'd been keeping wasn't peace. It was just the absence of a fight I hadn't yet had. I was 67 years old. I had a garden and a book club and a trip to New Mexico I hadn't finished thinking about. I had a daughter who called on Tuesdays and came in person when it mattered. I had a son who was learning, slowly and imperfectly, that love and leverage were not the same word. And I had a small blue notebook in my nightstand drawer that I was, slowly, working up to not needing anymore. Not today, but soon.